During a contentious segment on a popular daytime talk show, a significant ideological clash unfolded that highlighted the deep divisions within American political discourse. One of the co-hosts, known for her long-standing presence in media and her assertive political commentary, took direct issue with the remarks made by a rising conservative figure. The topic at hand was wokeness, a term that has increasingly become a flashpoint in American culture. The conservative guest, who had recently been appointed to a prominent communications position in national politics, had expressed skepticism and criticism of wokeness, calling it a distraction and suggesting that it hindered merit-based advancement and practical governance. This critique was not received passively. The co-host responded by pushing back hard, questioning whether the guest truly understood what the term meant or the social impact it has had. She argued that the evolution of woke ideals had played a pivotal role in dismantling long-standing barriers for women, minorities, and marginalized communities. In her view, these movements created opportunities that did not exist decades ago, particularly for young women in positions of power. Her implication was that such cultural progress allowed the guest to rise through political ranks, and that to dismiss it outright was both ungrateful and historically blind. The exchange intensified as the co-host elaborated on how the language of anti-wokeness often becomes a veiled way to reject inclusivity and downplay systemic issues. She cited historical examples of how societal structures had favored certain groups while oppressing others. By invoking civil rights achievements, labor reforms, and the expansion of educational access, she constructed a narrative in which the concept of being woke was synonymous with social awareness, justice, and progress. However, the guest remained composed and reiterated her original position, clarifying that her criticism was not aimed at equality or justice, but rather at how the concept had been co-opted and weaponized for political gain. She argued that wokeness, as it is currently manifested, often stifles debate, silences dissent, and prioritizes identity over competency. This stance, while resonating with certain audiences, stood in direct contrast to the co-host's framing of the issue as a fundamental moral and cultural evolution. The ideological fault lines were unmistakable. What began as a policy disagreement transformed into a cultural confrontation. The co-host's argument relied on lived experiences, historical context, and a broader view of societal transformation. She saw herself as someone who had witnessed firsthand the tangible benefits of cultural shifts towards inclusivity. She pointed to the increased presence of women in media, politics, and business as evidence that such changes were not only necessary but effective. Conversely, the guest's perspective was rooted in a critique of what she perceived as ideological overreach. She pointed to policies and institutional practices that, in her view, prioritize virtue signaling over results. For her, competence, personal responsibility, and freedom of thought were being eroded under the guise of progressive values. In her view, the cost of unchecked wokeness was a culture of conformity and fear, where dissenters are labeled and punished for holding unpopular opinions. As the exchange continued, it became clear that the two women were not merely disagreeing over a word. They were embodying two very different worldviews, one that sees progress through the lens of structural change and collective awareness, and another that sees it through individual achievement and resilience in the face of adversity. The co-host's insistence that the guest owed her position, at least in part, to the work of past generations of activists, was met with polite but firm rejection. The guest insisted that she had earned her place through hard work, not through identity or cultural trends. The dynamic between the two was reflective of broader societal debates happening across the country. It wasn't just about political affiliation, it was about how people define justice, merit, and progress. For some, the term woke represents empathy, inclusion, and social accountability. For others, it has come to signify overreach, performative politics, and ideological rigidity. The segment underscored how the language used in these debates can be just as polarizing as the underlying beliefs. While the conversation remained civil on the surface, the subtext was filled with tension, suggesting that these debates are far from settled in the public square. The tone of the discussion shifted notably when the segment moved from policy to personal critique. As the conversation unfolded on air, a prominent co-host known for her sharp wit and long-standing role on the show made a comment that strayed beyond the realm of political disagreement. She questioned the legitimacy of the guest's appointment to her high-profile role, implying that her physical appearance played a greater role in her advancement than her credentials or experience. With a smirk and an offhand tone, the host suggested that the guest had likely been chosen for her looks rather than her merit, reducing a complex professional trajectory to a superficial judgment. This remark struck a nerve, not only for the guest but also for many viewers who perceived it as a form of public belittlement. The implication behind the comment was clear, that the guest had not earned her place through intelligence, capability, or dedication, but rather through aesthetic appeal. In doing so, the host invoked a stereotype that has long plagued women. In professional environments, the idea that success for women is contingent on appearance rather than ability. The remark was particularly jarring in the context of a show that frequently advocates for women's empowerment and equality in the workplace. The guest, maintaining a composed demeanor, chose not to respond directly to the jab in the moment. Instead, she continued to articulate her political viewpoints with clarity and confidence. However, the personal nature of the attack lingered in the atmosphere. It served as a stark reminder of the double standards that still pervade public life. When women step into positions of power, especially in spaces traditionally dominated by men, they are often subjected to an additional layer of scrutiny, one that assesses their value not just by their work, but by how they look, speak, and carry themselves. Criticism of one's political stance is a standard part of public discourse, but when that criticism shifts to personal characteristics, especially ones unrelated to job performance or qualifications, it reveals a deeper cultural discomfort with female ambition. The comment made by the host was emblematic of this tension. In accusing the guest of being selected for reasons unrelated to her qualifications, the host inadvertently undermined the broader message of female empowerment the show often promotes. It was a moment of contradiction, a feminist platform being used to level a stereotypical and dismissive comment at another woman. In the days following the broadcast, the incident sparked widespread reaction. Supporters of the guest decried the comment as sexist and unprofessional, noting that it would likely have been condemned more broadly had it been directed at someone from a different political background. Others pointed out the irony of a progressive panel resorting to regressive insults when faced with ideological opposition. The controversy highlighted a growing concern that political discourse in media has become less about ideas and more about character assassination. What made the comment particularly damaging was its dismissive tone. It sought not only to belittle the guest's role, but to delegitimize her presence entirely. Rather than engaging with the substance of her views, the co-host opted for a personal attack that deflected from meaningful dialogue. The message was implicit but powerful. You don't belong here, not because of what you believe, but because of how you look. That kind of commentary, especially on such a widely viewed platform, carries weight and sets a troubling precedent for how women in politics are discussed and perceived. While the guest refrained from engaging in a back and forth, her composed response stood in contrast to the pettiness of the insult. She continued to advocate for her views, projecting an image of professionalism and resilience. In doing so, she demonstrated that success isn't measured by approval from popular media, but by one's ability to stay grounded in principles despite provocation. The moment served as a microcosm of the broader challenges faced by women in public life, where personal attacks are too often used to undercut professional legitimacy. The exchange revealed how easily media can slip from constructive criticism into personal degradation. It underscored the importance of holding public figures accountable for the tone and content of their remarks, particularly when those remarks carry the weight of cultural influence. At a time when the national conversation is grappling with issues of respect, representation, and civility, moments like these show how far we still have to go, not just in politics, but in the media spaces that shape how, in the face of sharp criticism and personal attacks during the televised segment, the guest chose to respond not with anger or retaliation, but by reaffirming the foundation of her beliefs, faith, values, and a commitment to principled leadership. Rather than engaging in the cycle of insult and counter-insult, she pivoted the conversation toward the values that guide her actions both personally and professionally. In doing so, she offered a sharp contrast to the tone of the show, which had veered into sarcasm and derision. Her calm and centered response brought a measure of sincerity and depth to an otherwise tense exchange. Throughout her public career, she has consistently referenced her Christian faith as central to her identity. It's not simply a personal conviction held in private, it is the lens through which she interprets her responsibilities, decisions, and conduct. Whether discussing issues of governance, media representation, or cultural change, she speaks from a place anchored in belief rather than pure strategy or ambition. That day, her response demonstrated this once again. Faced with pointed comments designed to shake her confidence or provoke a defensive reaction, she instead spoke with clarity about how her values are not just a campaign slogan or talking point, but a source of strength. What set her apart in that moment was the way she refused to be reduced to a caricature. Despite being on a show known for its combative style and emotionally charged exchanges, she remained composed and respectful. She acknowledged the difference in worldviews without disparaging those who disagreed with her. Her tone conveyed conviction, not contempt. This approach not only diffused the hostility in the room, but also quietly reminded the audience that leadership, especially in public service, demands grace under pressure. As she referenced her faith, it was clear that it was more than just a shield, it was a compass. She articulated how faith-based principles like humility, service, and forgiveness inform her understanding of leadership and civic duty. In a world increasingly dominated by cynicism and performative outrage, her message was a counterweight. By grounding her message in something deeper than politics, she was speaking to a broader audience, those who feel that moral clarity still has a place in public life. She has previously emphasized how her upbringing and spiritual background shaped her perspective. Raised in a small, tight-knit community, she often speaks about the importance of hard work, community service, and accountability. These are not just nostalgic references to a simpler past. They are guiding concepts she seeks to bring into the often disorienting world of national media and political messaging. When she invoked those values in the face of criticism, it was not an act of defensiveness, but of recentering. It was as though she was reminding herself, and others, of what truly matters beyond the spotlight and the sound bites. Critics may dismiss such references to faith as overly idealistic or even strategically manipulative. But for her, it is clear that these beliefs are not compartmentalized or conditional. They are not activated only when convenient. Her consistent return to the language of morality, conscience, and purpose, even when she is under fire, speaks to a larger ethos, one that views leadership not merely as a pursuit of power, but as a calling to serve with integrity. This insistence on bringing values into the conversation also served another purpose. It implicitly challenged the hosts to reflect on the tone and nature of their own commentary. By remaining composed and principled, she avoided the trap of reactive defensiveness and instead invited a different kind of conversation, one that doesn't sacrifice substance for spectacle. She was making a statement not just about herself, but about how public discourse could look if it were grounded in mutual respect and shared moral language. That moment stood out because it defied expectations. On a show that thrives on dramatic clashes and ideological fireworks, she chose peace over provocation. Her refusal to escalate the tension was not a sign of weakness, but of strength. In a setting where many come prepared with rehearsed zingers and rehearsed outrage, she offered authenticity. And in doing so, she reminded the audience, and perhaps even her critics, that conviction, when rooted in something larger than self-interest, has a power that no insult can diminish. Following the broadcast, the reaction to the segment was swift and deeply divided. While many viewers expressed support for the guests' poise and professionalism, others focused on the conduct of the hosts, particularly the personal nature of their remarks. Social media lit up with criticism directed at the panel, with users calling the discussion disrespectful, dismissive, and out of step with the values the show claims to promote. the backlash was not limited to one side of the political spectrum. Commentators across media platforms, including those who typically align with the show's perspectives, noted that the conversation had crossed a line from spirited debate into personal attack. As the criticism grew louder, it became clear that damage control was necessary. Within days of the airing, the hosts addressed the controversy during a follow-up episode. One of them acknowledged that the tone of the exchange may have been too pointed and admitted that remarks made during the segment could have been taken as unnecessarily harsh or personal. Another added that while their intention was to challenge ideas, they regretted how some of their words had come across. The discussion was framed as an attempt to clarify rather than retract, but the message was clear. They had heard the public's reaction and were stepping back to reassess how the exchange unfolded. What stood out about this moment of public reflection was the level of self-awareness that had been absent during the original segment. The acknowledgement of missteps, even if subtly delivered, marked a rare instance of televised self-correction. In a media landscape often driven by ego and defensiveness, the willingness to address the controversy, even if only briefly, suggested that the criticism had struck a nerve. It also highlighted the power of audience feedback in holding high profile voices accountable, especially when it comes to matters of tone and respect. The guest, for her part, responded to the apology with professionalism and grace. She thanked the host for acknowledging the issue and reiterated the importance of civil discourse, even among those who fundamentally disagree. In doing so, she modeled the very values she had spoken about during the segment: respect, faith, and the belief that public debate does not have to come at the cost of personal dignity. Her response was firm but not vindictive, a gesture that underscored her consistent messaging and personal discipline. The entire episode sparked broader conversations about how media treats young women in politics, particularly those who don't conform to the dominant ideological leanings of the platforms on which they appear. It raised questions about the double standard often applied to individuals who bring differing perspectives into mainstream spaces. Would similar remarks have been made about someone else in a similar position with different political beliefs? Would appearance or age have been brought into the discussion? These questions resonated beyond the immediate controversy, pointing to underlying tensions about inclusion, representation, and the genuine openness of so-called open forums. What made the apology segment resonate was not only the acknowledgement of wrongdoing, but the opportunity it presented for reflection. Viewers were given a moment to consider the limits of political commentary and the responsibilities of those with large platforms. It served as a reminder that influence comes with accountability. For a show that positions itself as a space for serious conversation, laughter, and female empowerment, the controversy presented a test of those values. How they handled it afterward became just as important as the moment itself. The guest's acceptance of the apology also underscored a broader theme. Disagreement does not have to lead to dehumanization. Throughout the ordeal, she demonstrated that it is possible to stand firm in one's beliefs without resorting to hostility or pettiness. Her approach reinforced the idea that respect is not weakness, and that responding with dignity can be more impactful than reacting with outrage. In doing so, she quietly shifted the tone of the entire conversation, from conflict to a more grounded and values-based dialogue. This incident also left a lingering impact on how future guests, particularly those from differing ideological backgrounds, might be treated. It served as a cautionary tale about how quickly credibility can be undermined by condescension, and how even long-standing media institutions must continuously reevaluate their standards of fairness. In a time when public trust in media is increasingly fragile, the way such situations are handled becomes a reflection of whether that trust can be earned or further eroded. In the aftermath of the exchange, what remained most significant was not just the controversy itself, but what it revealed about the current state of public discourse, the responsibilities of media platforms, and the expectations we place on those who lead and speak in the public square. The incident served as a microcosm of the broader cultural and political tensions playing out across the country, where ideological divides have deepened and where conversations that should be grounded in mutual understanding often devolve into personal attacks and dismissive rhetoric. Yet, amid the clash of opinions and values, there was also a moment of clarity. The guest's composure, her reliance on personal conviction rather than political maneuvering, and her refusal to retaliate demonstrated that civility is not weakness. It is strength under pressure. She chose the path of dignity, emphasizing that grace and principle can still hold their ground even in hostile environments. Her response provided a blueprint for how leaders and public figures might engage in difficult conversations without surrendering their integrity or stooping to the level of insult. For the hosts, the experience offered a lesson in humility and accountability. Public platforms like theirs carry immense influence, and with that comes the responsibility to uphold a standard of respect, especially when engaging with those who hold differing viewpoints. The apology, while brief, was a step in the right direction. It suggested that reflection is possible, and that course correction, when sincerely undertaken, can begin to restore credibility and trust. More broadly, the moment highlighted how essential it is for media spaces to serve not just as echo chambers, but as arenas for real dialogue. If a show that prides itself on inclusive and open conversation cannot extend that principle to all guests, regardless of their ideology, then it loses the very foundation on which its credibility rests. The willingness to host opposing views must be matched by the willingness to engage those views seriously and respectfully. Ultimately, this episode served as a reminder that the people who shape public dialogue, whether in media, politics, or culture, have a choice in how they wield their influence. They can choose to tear down or to build up. They can choose provocation or principle. In a time when division feels ever more entrenched, the value of respectful discourse cannot be overstated. It is through these moments of friction that true character is revealed. Whether one agrees with the guest's views or not, it is difficult to deny the poise with which she handled herself. She emerged from the moment not as a victim, but as a voice, one committed to the idea that belief, conviction, and civility are not mutually exclusive. And in doing so, she challenged not only her critics, but the wider culture to reconsider what it